When looking over the mechanics of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's interesting to see where we are now compared to where we've come from. All of the summoning mechanics, from fusion all the way to links, have had their ups and downs across the history of the game, from humble beginnings to breaking the meta wide open in various ways. And rituals are no exception to this. From their clunky beginnings in the third ever TCG set to now, where we've seen multiple meta-dominant strategies sprout from this historically troubled mechanic. Today we're going to look over the history of changes to the mechanic as a whole, what cards had significant impact on the mechanic, and which cards pivoted ritual design as a whole. Let's take a look at the evolution of rituals. Released on September 16th, 2002, Magic Ruler, or Spell Ruler as it's known by now, was the third main set of the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game. The set itself is mainly known for a variety of spell cards that were so game-warpingly powerful they currently occupy the ban list, including Snatch Steal, Confiscation, Delinquent Duo, The Forceful Sentry, Giant Trunade, and Painful Choice, as well as those that are just standardly good in various eras, like Mystical Space Typhoon and Upstart Goblin. The other major contribution of this set was the introduction of rituals as a mechanic. The primary idea behind rituals was to serve as a counterpart to the previously introduced fusion mechanic, as rather than needing 3+ specific cards to summon a monster from the extra deck, you only needed 2 specific cards, being the ritual spell and monster, but needed to sacrifice other monsters whose total levels are equal to or greater than the ritual monsters. This mechanic, though it could summon a monster with an attack as high as 2550 with Crab Turtle, was almost immediately written off as just another clunky summoning mechanic that's too inconsistent to take seriously, with the sole exception of Relinquished, as he actually had a decent effect and low enough level to be summoned without too much hassle. In addition to the initial wave of ritual monsters and spells, we also received Sonic Bird and Senju of the Thousand Hands, who could search for a ritual spell or monster respectively on their normal or flip summons. These two would eventually be surpassed by Manju of the 10,000 Hands in Invasion of Chaos, who had both of their effects rolled into a single monster, but none of these would be enough to bring Ritual into meta contention in the slightest, as the standard beatdown decks, Hand Control, and eventually Chaos were just all superior in every way to Rituals. Because of this, Rituals were mostly forgotten until 2006, when a new set of releases would bring the mechanic back in an interesting way. With the passing of Goat and Reaper format, Rituals still had not made any form of significant impact in the metagame since their introduction in 2002, as any ritual released between the initial batch in 2002 and early 2006 either was a glorified vanilla with no effect, or a slower, clunkier effect that was not powerful enough to consider building a deck around. This would slowly begin to change with Shadows of Infinity on February 18th of 2006, with the release of Demise and Ruin. Both Demise and Ruin were summonable with the same ritual spell, the End of the World, tying the two together. But among the two, the clearly more interesting card was Demise, who had the ability to pay 2,000 life points to nuke the board of everything except himself. While this board clearing effect was powerful, it still wasn't enough for Demise to see serious meta play immediately, as you still had to ritual summon a level 8 monster to get that effect, which could then be removed with a popular staple like Bottomless Trap Hole or Torrential Tribute. Although at the time, priority was still a rule, so you could still get the nuke effect off even if Demise was removed. Eventually, with the set Strike of Neos in February of 2007, a new way to enable these ritual monsters was finally introduced with Advanced Ritual Art, a ritual spell that allowed you to ritual summon any ritual monster by sending normal monsters from the deck to the graveyard as their tribute requirement. This would instantly be combined with the previously mentioned Demise to form a new deck known as Demise OTK. A deck that aimed to use Advanced Ritual Art with Demise to dump copies of normal insect monsters like Insect Knight, Neobug, and Metal Armored Bug to enable the summon of Doomdozer after clearing back row with Demise, which would be lethal when combined with a Megamorph, which would generally be active due to the 2,000 life point payment of Demise. While this sounds extremely clunky, which it was, the deck had multiple other ways into OTK lines once Demise had cleared the board, such as Premature Burial to revive Metal Armored Bug sent from Demise's summon, Metamorphosis to turn a Demise into a Cyber Twin Dragon once the board was cleared, and trap options like Ring of Destruction and Magic Cylinder to push that final bit of damage when missing. All of this was enabled off the release of Advanced Ritual Art, as it reduced the necessary components of a ritual summon from 3+ all the way down to just 2, being itself and the intended ritual monster. Eventually, this strategy was countered by decks of the time adjusting builds to counter demise before it even reached the board, such as the inclusion of Mind Crush and Trap Dust Shoot into decks moving forward to snipe out pieces of the OTK before they reached the board. Eventually, the deck was pushed out of the meta with the popularity of these tech choices and eventually the rise of Perfect Circle, ending the meta playability of the first real meta ritual deck. From the end of Demise's meta play in mid to late GX until the early Zexal era, rituals would gain small pieces of support here and there to help strengthen the mechanic as a whole, but nothing so powerful as to push a ritual-focused deck back into major meta contention. The first of these was the monster Ritual Raven, introduced in Tactical Evolution in August of 2007. This monster was the first monster able to consider itself the entire tribute for a ritual summon regardless of the level of the monster it was summoning, although this would only be applicable for dark ritual monsters. While this card would see absolutely no play, it laid the groundwork for some of the most powerful pieces of ritual support that would eventually be released, as many pieces of eventual support had the ability to consider themselves the full tribute requirement. In a similar vein, the Jin monsters were released in Stardust Overdrive in November of 2009, a series of monsters that could be banished from grave to help pay the cost of a ritual summon and gave unique effects to the monster they helped summon. These 5 in the initial batch included Presider, who let the player draw a card when its ritual monster destroyed a monster in battle, Releaser, who prevented the opponent from special summoning while the ritual was on the field, Curse Enchanter, who negated all synchro monster effects while the ritual was on the field, Desarier, who made the ritual monster immune to traps, and Prognosticator, who made the opponent discard a card whenever its ritual monster dealt battle damage. While the majority of these were lackluster at best, Releaser was notably good among its own series of monsters, as a special summon lock on the opponent is a major status effect, only held back by the fact that the only really effective way to set her up for a ritual summon was Foolish Burial, a card on the limited list, and was not particularly accessible when needed. Preparation of Rites, also released in Stardust Overdrive, would be the first truly generic way to search for ritual monsters outside of a normal summon, essentially boosting the copies of any level 7 or lower ritual monster in your deck to 6, and even provided recycling for your used ritual spells on top of it. At this point in time though, with the only good build around ritual monster being Demise at level 8, it wouldn't be useful on release, but was clearly a step in the direction of consistency for the mechanic. In this time frame, only one new ritual monster would be introduced to see any form of meta play, being Herald of Perfection, released in the Shining Darkness in May of 2010, who had the ability to discard a fairy monster to negate a spell, trap, or monster effect that was activated. While a good effect, it would not see play until the Lost Sanctuary structure deck released in June of 2011, which brought Agents into the meta as a viable option, and even then, he was played as a tech choice at most. With the 5Ds era coming and going without a single meta breakthrough with rituals, the mechanic itself was in need of a serious overhaul to see success in the rapidly speeding up landscape around it. Luckily for it, that overhaul was right around the corner. With the release of Hidden Arsenal 5 in December of 2011, the archetype of Gishki was released officially to the TCG, although it had been introduced back in the Dual Terminal Series 5B a few months prior to this, though was not legal in tournament use until this release. Gishki as an archetype was focused around making the ritual mechanic as simple to use as it could for the time, with multiple ritual monster targets, versatility in its monster lineup, and recyclability in its ritual spell, Aquamirror. Aquamirror could be used to summon any of the Gishki ritual monsters, then could be shuffled back into the deck from the graveyard to return any Gishki ritual monster from the grave back to hand. This interaction would commonly let Gishki decks use a second copy of a ritual monster as the tribute material needed to summon the first, then return the second back to the hand with Aquamirror to maintain resources. In addition to this, they also received Shadow, who could discard itself from hand to search for Aquamirror from the deck, or be used as the entire ritual requirement for the summon of a water ritual monster. And eventually Vision, who had the same ritual requirement effect and searched a Gishki monster instead. This was all meant to facilitate the easy ritual summoning of the various Gishki ritual monsters, which included Soul Ogre, who could discard a Gishki to shuffle an opponent's face-up card into the deck, Mind August, who shuffled up to 5 cards from any graveyard into the deck on Ritual Summon, Gust Kraken, who looked at 2 cards in the opponent's hand and shuffled 1 back into the deck on Ritual Summon, and the eventual Yugioh, who could pay 1,000 life points to draw a card, then if it was a Gishki monster, shuffled a card on the field back into deck. From the loop of resources the different pieces provided, Gishki found itself evolving into a number of degenerate strategies over time, such as the theorized Gust Kraken hand loop in mid-2012, which involved the looping of Gust Kraken discarding an opponent's card when summoned by tributing a Hieratic monster, which summoned a level 6 from deck and allowing you to overlay the 2 into a rank 6 like M7, who could detach a material and add a piece back from the graveyard, like Gishki Shadow or the tributed Hieratic, to put Gust Kraken into the graveyard, where it could be recycled by Aquamirror, allowing you to continuously loop Gust Krakens until you either ran out of looping resources or the opponent was out of cards in the hand. And the Mind August FTK in early 2013, which involved the consistent reuse of cards like Card and Hand Destruction, Dark World Dealings, and One Day of Peace to force the opponent to deck out before their first card was drawn. Both of these decks would be addressed with hits on the ban list, with the limiting of Gust Kraken in September of 2012 and Mind August in September of 2013. An interesting note here is that the Gust Kraken hand loop was never actually fully realized, as the main enabling card for the loop, being Constellar Ptolemy M7, was not released until after Gust Kraken was limited, which was done to prevent the hand loop from becoming an issue in the TCG as it had in the OCG. After these loops were eventually struck down, Gishki faded into obscurity, only seeing success with the eventual Yugioh, which became the new focus of the deck. No other major pieces of support would be released in the Zexal era, as soon after these decks rose and fell, Dragon Rulers took over the format. Although at the very beginning of the Arc 5 era, we received 2 new pieces of the previously established Herald archetype, being Herald of the Arclight and Ultimateness, released in the new Challengers in November of 2014. Of these 2, only Arclight saw play at the time, being a generic level 4 synchro that provided a Macrocosmos-like effect on any card that was sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, and a single-use Omni Negate would see play for that reason alone, but it also provided a search for a ritual monster or spell upon being sent to graveyard. This small detail was about to become a lot more relevant with the next big ritual archetype released 4 months later, and it seemed the design team learned from Gishki on how to make a ritual deck viable, as this one would not disappoint. Released in Secrets of Eternity and the Secret Forces between January and February of 2015, Nekroz was a new ritual archetype that took the concepts introduced with Gishki and ran with them. Where Gishki's main search ability was tied to their non-ritual monsters, Nekroz's was tied to the ritual monsters Bryonic, who could search any other Nekroz ritual monster, and Clausulus, who could search any Nekroz ritual spell. While this might seem like a small difference, this meant that all of their searchers were themselves searchable, meaning cards like Preparation of Rites could turn into a search for the entire ritual engine by searching a single copy of Bryonic, who could search for any of the ritual monsters in Archetype, including Clausulus, who could search for any of the ritual spells. In addition, the monsters that were searchable were actually really good, such as Unicorn, who could either discard himself to recycle a Nekroz card or negate the effects of an extra deck summoned monster while on the field, Valkyrus, who could be discarded to banish a card in the grave and end the battle phase when the opponent attacked, or could tribute up to 2 monsters from hand or field while on field to draw that many cards, and Trishula, who could be discarded to negate the activation of a card or effect that targets a Nekroz monster, or could banish a card from the hand, field, and grave when summoned, but notably had to have a target in all 3 to activate this effect. While these alone would have been powerful, the deck also had the non-ritual monster Shuret, who could be considered the entire ritual cost of any of the Nekroz monsters, and searched a warrior Nekroz ritual monster when tributed, meaning he searched for Clausulus, Bryonic, or Trishula. The search effect also triggered when he was tributed in general, meaning you could tribute him from hand for Valkyrus' effect to draw, then get his search effect in addition. In addition to all of this, the deck had 3 different ritual spells, being Kaleidoscope, Mirror, and Cycle, which each had the ability to banish themselves from grave with a Nekroz monster to search for any Nekroz spell in deck if you controlled no ritual monsters. And each had a unique ritual summon effect, with Mirror being able to banish materials from grave for the summon, Cycle being able to summon a ritual monster from the graveyard, and Kaleidoscope being able to use 1 material from the extra deck to summon 1 or more ritual monsters at the same time. Kaleidoscope in particular here had a great interaction with the recently released Herald of the Arclight, as you could send Herald of the Arclight to the grave to summon Yugioh, then trigger Arclight's effect to search for another ritual piece. What pushed this deck into an arguably tier 0 position was its interactions with Jin, Releaser of Rituals, as commonly you could start your combo with a search with either Senju or Manju, go into Yugioh using one of your many options, getting searches along the way, overlay the two for Lavalval Chain, who could then detach a material to dump Releaser from the deck, and then make one last ritual monster using Releaser in the graveyard for the summon to give the special summon lock, commonly referred to as the Jin lock in the community. With this, many decks would play specific outs to the Jin lock just so they didn't automatically lose to it, and even then it wasn't a guaranteed answer to it, as cards like Trishula and the occasionally played Gungnir could block effects aimed at removing the Jin lock. Similarly to Gishki before it, Nekroz would require bandless attention to help rein it in, with Lavalval Chain and Releaser being banned and Shuret being limited in July of 2015, and the eventual banning of Shuret and limiting of Bryonic and Yugioh in November, effectively removing Nekroz from the meta directly before the true Pendulum takeover with Pepe on the horizon. Nekroz would be one of the last major decks before the full takeover of Pendulum strategies in the latter half of the Arc 5 era, alongside Shadal, Burning Abyss, and Clifford, which were all hit on the same list in November. With the game entering a post-Nekroz era, many looked to future releases to see how rituals as a mechanic would adapt to the rapidly changing landscape. With Nekroz effectively dead and Pendulums fully taking over the meta, Ritual as a mechanic was left in a strange limbo state, as too much direct support after Nekroz was not going to be received too well by the community. With this in mind, the next few releases over the end of the Arc 5 era and leading into the Vrains era would bring new ideas to the table for Ritual strategies, starting with a card released in Shining Victories in May of 2016, being Pre-Preparation of Rites, a spell that searched a ritual spell and a monster listed on that ritual spell from the deck, being effectively a one-card enabler for a full ritual summon on the condition that the ritual monster was actually listed on the spell itself. Because of this stipulation, you couldn't search for generic spells like Advanced Ritual Art or the Nekroz spells because they did not list a specific monster on them, so it was seen as an enabler of sorts for the more clunky ritual monsters of the time. The next real ritual threat wasn't even its deck's main game plan, being released in the D-Sod movie pack in July of 2016, being Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon, a level 8 with 4000 attack that dealt double piercing battle damage, meaning it effectively ended the game on its own if it attacked a low enough defense monster while it was in defense position. This would be seen as an option in the quickly rising Blue Eyes deck at the time to be used with Advanced Ritual Art, but by no means was it mandatory, as the pieces to summon him tended to be a bit clunky in the deck. The first true ritual deck after the butchering of Nekroz would be Cyber Angels, released in Dragons of Legend Unleashed in August of 2016, being a ritual archetype that generated advantage off tributing their ritual monsters, particularly in Benten, who searched a light fairy when tributed, and Editen, who boosted all ritual monsters by 1000 attack and defense when tributed. While the archetype was consistent thanks to its numerous pieces of support released with it, such as Cyber Petite Angel and Ritual Sanctuary, its power level was considerably lower than the other archetypes of the time, such as Monarch, PK Fire, and the aforementioned Blue Eyes, and far below that of the soon-to-be released Zodiacs. The next few releases, being the main ritual releases of the Vrains era, would do nothing for the mechanic in the meta, but would change some factors in the design of ritual cards. The first of these was Vendread, releasing in Code of the Duelist in August of 2017, as an archetype of zombie rituals that gained effects off ritual summoning using their non-ritual monsters on the field as material. This archetype was notable in that its pieces only gave the bonus effects if tributed from the field, although the ritual monsters could commonly be ritual summoned from the graveyard using their ritual spells. Unfortunately, being a lot slower than the other decks of the time like True Draco, Pendulum Magician, and Spiral, the deck was left without a home in the meta quickly, and eventually passed over altogether. The next big ritual archetype would be released in Cybernetic Horizon, released in July of 2018, being Impcantations, a series of monsters that summon themselves from hand and deck when you have a piece of a ritual summon in hand, providing excellent recursion for ritual decks, even outside of their own dedicated deck, seeing play as an engine for decks trying to take advantage of less powerful ritual archetypes. The last noteworthy ritual archetype of the Vrains era would be Megalith, released in Ignition Assault in January of 2020, being notable in that the archetype ritual summoned their pieces without ritual spells, as each of the monsters had an ability to either ritual summon by discarding themselves, or to ritual summon once while on field using themselves as material, with the smaller pieces able to search or draw on summon, and the larger pieces providing payoffs to your ritual chain. This one would see experimentation thanks to rocks gaining traction in the meta with the soon-to-be released Adamancipators, but would quickly be passed over for those same Adamancipators as they were far stronger without Megalith. While rituals would not make any real impact in the meta through the Reigns era, the modern era was on the horizon, and with it, the most powerful ritual archetype since Nekroz. With the changes of Master Rule 5 and the older extra deck mechanics regaining their old footing in the meta, rituals were about to stage a similar comeback. Released in Genesis Impact in December of 2020, Drytron was released, a series of level 1 machine monsters each with 2000 attack and 0 defense that must be special summoned by tributing another Drytron or ritual in hand or on field, gaining an effect when summoned this way. This included Alpha Thuban, who searched a ritual monster, Beta Raspin, who returned a banished Drytron to grave, Delta Altes, who revealed a ritual piece in hand to draw one, Gamma Eltanin, who summoned a 2000 attack Drytron from grave, and Zeta Alhiba, who searched a ritual spell. All of these were to enable their level 12 ritual monsters, which might instantly raise some eyebrows as all of the non-ritual main deck monsters are level 1, being very difficult to ritual summon with those levels. The answer lied in their ritual spell Midionis Drytron, which could ritual summon any monster from hand or graveyard by using machine monsters' attacks as the ritual cost. Meaning a monster with 4000 attack, like all of the Drytron rituals, would need 4000 attack tributed to summon, such as 2 of the level 1 Drytrons. In addition to this, it could recycle itself by dropping the attack value of a Drytron by 1000, adding it back to hand and instantly being usable again, although this recycle was once per turn. Between this, their spell Drytron Nova, which could special summon a Drytron from deck, and the previously released Cyber Emergency, which could actually search the Drytron monsters thanks to them not being able to be normal summon or set, Drytron showed immense promise out the gate with their release, only growing more powerful with Lightning Overdrive released in June of 2021, which gave them their Exceed monster Mu Beta Fafnir, who sent a Drytron card from deck to grave on summon and could use its Exceed materials as ritual materials. The part of Drytron that was particularly interesting, however, was that its ritual spell, while specifying the tribute materials had to be machines, did not have any specifications on what could and could not be summoned with it. Because of this, Herald of Ultimateness, having only 2000 attack, became an ideal target for the ritual spell, allowing the deck to combine with various fairy-based ritual support, such as Cyber Angel Benton, whose search effect could be triggered by the Drytron summon effect, Ava, who could banish used fairies from the grave to search for more, Herald of the Orange Light, who acted as a better version of Psyframe Gear Gamma for the deck, and the newly released Diviner of the Herald, who could send a fairy from deck or extra deck to grave to modulate her level on summon, which could send Herald of the Arclight to get an additional ritual piece search and modulate her level to 6, making her prime material to overlay with a Ben 10 to make Beatrice and set up the grave further. Because of these resources able to generate numerous amounts of fairies in hand by performing the standard Drytron plays, ending your lines with a Herald of Ultimateness summon would give you a number of fairies in hand that could fuel his effect, providing a multi-use Omni Negate and Special Summon Negate all in one, which could refuel its negates thanks to Ava's effect when sent to graveyard. With this support, Drytron would rise to tier 1 and be considered one of the best decks to use for multiple formats, only falling into the TCG due to the limiting of Ben 10 in March of 2021 before Mu Beta Fafnir and Diviner's release, and the eventual banning of Ava in February of 2022. While Drytron is still currently present in the metagame, as none of the archetypal pieces have been hit, the deck has lost almost all of its relevance with the ban list hits and general shift in meta away from the deck, as hand traps have become far more common than they were even at Drytron's high point, especially with the prevalence of DPE and the Adventure engine currently dominating the game. With some other interesting ritual pieces having been released since then, such as High Ritual Art, which serves as a pseudo-reverse advanced ritual art, tributing monsters from the hand or field to summon a ritual monster from the deck, Transonic Bird, who can modulate his level and copy the effect of a ritual spell in deck by sending it to graveyard, and the new Libromancer archetype, the newest TCG exclusive archetype that got its start in Battle of Chaos in February of 2022, rituals seem to still be constantly reinventing themselves, and evolving the mechanic into one that can rival its original competition of Fusion, but only time will tell if it can ever reach the same highs. Thank you all for watching this deep dive analysis. I do greatly appreciate you guys watching to the very end of this video. If you enjoy content like this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more like it. If you want more details on the behind the scenes for these, please follow me on Twitter or check out my Twitch streams whenever they happen. Both links are in the description below. Thank you all again, and I'll see you next time.